Hey, Matthew.
Hey, what's going on? How you doing, Mark?
And we're officially rolling.
We're rolling.
All right. So another big week at the UN.
It was a pretty things have been slow sometimes, but this week with the Darfur resolution, there was a day that felt like last summer and big things.
Do tell me. I'm speaking with Matthew Lee of Inner City Press, and this is Mark Goldberg of UN Dispatch and the American Prospect. Just for our
sure. No, I'm sorry to launch into it.
Viewers out there,
that's
listeners out there,
definitely.
So big week. We had the Darfur resolution passed unanimously this time at the Security Council on Tuesday, I believe.
It was on Tuesday, and it was
on Tuesday. Yeah.
Yep.
How was what was the reaction?
The mood was first.
Halls?
I mean, I will say, and just in terms of like the journalists here, people were like, it's sort of it was a the stakeout area outside the Security Council was full, and all of the ambassadors wanted to speak, but it in a strange way. I mean, it was portrayed. I think Ban Ki-moon was quoted, or he didn't stop and speak, by the way, but in his prepared remarks, he said that it was historic. I think there was a lot of people that had been following it were amazed that in the sort of the end game of the drafting of the resolution, how much got stripped out. In one sense, it's good because it shows multilateralism. Like the Sudanese ambassador Abdul Halim Mohammed was sat up, according to him and according to the English ambassador in the UK mission Sunday night. His words was cleaning up the text. And it was pretty cleaned. I mean, it passed, so you can say it's a good thing. One can say it's a good thing, but
I tell you, this is an issue I follow particularly closely.
Go ahead.
And this resolution is sort of unlike the others.
Yep.
For the principal reason that this is the first time that China did not abstain from the resolution, but rather voted in the affirmative for it.
Yep.
Now, in all the previous resolutions, China had worked behind the scenes to water down the text to a point where they would not veto; they would only abstain.
Yep.
However, this time, they did water down the text like they do in all the Sudanese resolutions, except they kept intact some of the important parts. And ended up voting for it. The important sort of part that they kept intact, of course, was the Chapter 7 resolution.
Right.
So this the hybrid UN force, a so-called force of African Union troops and that are essentially under the UN command, are going to be now able to provide legitimate civilian protection to people in Darfur. Once, of course, they actually get on the ground there.
But can I say that, and you're right in terms of that. That's definitely. I think that China's different position. Some people might ascribe it to just pressure that's been brought to bear on them, the importance of the Olympics to them.
Yes.
It was probably also Tuesday was the last day of of July, but also the last day of China's presidency of the Security Council. So actually, some people believe that they very much wanted it passed on their presidency, so they could, in the future, whatever happens, they can say, "What do you mean? We're protecting genocide in Sudan. We passed the resolution." But the one thing I would highlight in the resolution is there is Chapter 7, Chapter 7 meaning mandatory, and it does say to protect civilians. But the sentence goes on to say to protect civilians without prejudice to the responsibilities of the government of Sudan. And having talked to the Sudanese ambassador, their read on that, and I think the reason that they said they're happy with the resolution is that the UN force would have to, according to the Sudanese ambassador, check with Sudan before it protected civilians.
Okay, well...
You see what I'm saying? Which is a major... Yes. I'm not saying that makes
that's certainly what the Sudanese ambassador would say.
Right. And the problem is that's what President al-Bashir is going to say, and then you're going to have the same... I don't mean to be negative about it. I'm just saying I think that you're going to see that language is going to be the problem down the road.
I don't agree with you on this one. This language, that without prejudice language, I think is essentially a disclaimer saying that the UN-AU hybrid force is not invading their country. However, it makes clear, the resolution makes clear that the UN and the Sudanese government must establish a status of forces agreement within the next 30 days, and there are consequences to not. Well, actually, I should back up. The resolution, says that the UN and the AU are going to, there's a clear path being laid out in which there will be sort of international forces on the ground,
mm-hmm.
and this could be, the Sudanese government has essentially already given its consent for this force, and now it's incumbent upon the international community to keep the pressure up on Sudan in
mm-hmm.
order so that they don't back out from this agreement.
No, exactly. I mean, I guess what the thing is, as there are, I guess I would just say, if the very day the thing is passed, the two parties, or let's say Sudan on one side and other people that voted for it, are articulating an entirely different interpretation of it when it's passed, this seems to me to be a setup for disagreements down the road. Now, maybe maybe it doesn't matter. They agreed to it, and therefore, the UN or the force with an African character will just take action, regardless of what President Bashir says. But for some reason, I doubt that.
Yeah.
We may disagree.
Well, I mean, there's like a pattern of behavior here on the part of the Sudanese government in which they give the international community what it needs to pass this and that resolution.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, though, the Sudanese government has been simply intransigent when it comes to when it comes to actually implementing the resolution. What makes this resolution different, in my mind, is that finally China, Sudan's ally on the Security Council, China,
right.
is on board with this resolution. So I think the value in this resolution and the benefit of this resolution is that it's the first time that you have China, Sudan's ally, on board affirmatively, not simply abstaining, but voting for this
right.
resolution. So that will make it harder for Sudan to back out of the agreement set forth in this resolution. For example, signing the status of forces agreement within the next 30 days.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, I think you're right. No, absolutely. I think maybe I guess the difference is, I think the fact that it got done, that China wanted it to get done, is reflective of increased pressure among the international community, and being felt both in Beijing and in Khartoum. So I think it's part of a good trend. I'm just sort of, given that trend, for example, the resolution in earlier drafts spelled out what would have been consequences of not complying. That all came out. There was some sort of also language, the sort of talking and denouncing past failure to comply. That came out. So I think each time we looked at the draft, China. It was getting weaker and weaker. But it's still the fact that it passed is significant.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it is significant. At the same time, I'm not going to hold my breath.
Right.
Too. Like I said, while this resolution is significant because China is for it rather than abstaining from it, there's still a lot of steps that need to get done before we'll see, peacekeepers on the ground in Darfur.
Mm-hmm.
And there's there is a lot of opportunity for the Sudanese government to back away from it, but so far, this is the best resolution that has been passed.
Right. No, exactly. And I mean, since the thing about it is that it was inevitable that something was going to happen, given that it's been this whole cat and mouse game. But Ban Ki-moon had announced a number of times that President Bashir had made this commitment, and so it was a matter of nailing it down. I agree. I'm not trying to be like overly negative about it. I guess it was people were sort of flabbergasted because there was a whole consultation process. So like for at least a week, but probably 10 days before it passed, every time the ambassadors would come to the stakeout outside the Security Council, even if they were talking about something else. There was Georgia, there was Nepal, there was a lot of things going through, but everyone was asking about this. And each time we saw a draft, it was like, wow, more things out. So I guess
that's and that's how every draft on Darfur has been since from the first draft from the first resolution. In 2005 till now.
Sure.
Or pardon me, in 2004 until now. Except this time like in those times, China has been has been taking things out of the drafts until it's acceptable for them to abstain. But this time, at least, they voted for it.
But it's interesting, and maybe this is maybe it's not the right comparison, but there have been this the similar sort of negotiation time and sort of hoopla at the end. On resolutions on they're both non-proliferation, but on Iran and on North Korea. Yeah. So it's sort of, I found myself thinking like Sudan was smart to get involved. Like North Korea, each time there's been a resolution, denouncing it for nuclear tests, and obviously that's a whole other kettle of worms. But they don't participate in the drafting. They basically, from the outset, everyone knows that they're going to denounce the resolution as impinging on their sovereignty and call the press reptiles. This is their most recent stuff. But everyone knows how it's going to go, and in a way, like, you end up with these very strong resolutions because the party being considered is so resistant to it that people are like, screw it, Whereas in this case, Sudan was on the inside, had China repeatedly saying we can't pass it in this form.
Yes.
Others in the African group sort of also raising some questions, and so they ended up getting a much there are no sanctions. Let's put it that way.
No. Well, I mean, there are sanctions. There are UN sanctions on 4.
Sure.
Sudanese individuals, only 2 of whom are members of the government of Sudan.
Right.
The other and mid-level officials at that. The other individual sanctions are against some rebel leaders.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because I'm really are you following? Although this is not like straight Security Council, but the meeting of Darfur rebels in Arusha. Is this?
No. Do tell.
Okay, no, because this is sort of what everyone says, even the proponents of the resolution, is that the solution will be political, and in order.
Yes.
This is like Jan Eliasson or Eliasson, however people want to say it. He's over there trying to see that the increasingly fractured group of rebel groups in Darfur unify so that actually some type of a peace agreement can be reached.
Well, I mean that was one of the reasons that the Darfur peace agreement fell apart. Was because by the time it was signed in May of 2006, and by the time that the resolution was put forward, the Darfur peace agreement was put forward, the rebel groups had already split into 3 factions, and now they've split even more since then, and only one of the groups ended up signing it, and it's been to Darfur. The people of Darfur's detriment that the rebel groups can't get together and form one cohesive unit, to bargain politically with the central government in Khartoum.
No, and also, and this is not obviously. I'm certainly not saying that the ambassador of Sudan is in any way reasonable, but he does talk to the press a lot here. Afterwards, and I'll ascribe. Maybe I'm projecting this, but just for like the day that they were voting on the resolution on Tuesday. Not down by where the Security Council is, but on the 3rd floor where most of the press offices are, the ambassador of Sudan started talking, and he just kept talking. Next thing, he's like surrounded by like 40 journalists, because everybody has to write a story about it. So everyone and he's giving quotes. I mean, he's telling it like it is. Afterwards, somebody said to me that running through their mind was like, stabbing with a pen. Just so you know. I just thought it was so funny. And it's
interesting. I go to a lot of these events at Brookings and Carnegie that talk about Sudan, and at every event, there is a representative of the Sudanese embassy here in Washington at these events, standing up, raising their hands, and objecting point by point to every issue raised by whoever the speaker is at the time, be it Susan Rice or Andrew Natsios or whomever. And it's always kind of a hoot in a way to see these guys, because they're just kind of, everyone glares at them in the audience and is like, directs their ire, and the person speaking gets to sort of take their anger and aggression out on this representative of the Sudanese government. It's always kind of interesting dynamic to watch.
But what's funny here is that this guy, Abdul Halim Mohammed, he's actually a very, he's a very good advocate for them, because he doesn't lose his cool. He doesn't come off as crazy. He's kind of funny. And often the journalists here find him more, for whatever his country is doing, he's actually much easier to find, and he'll, any question you have, he'll answer it. What I actually, and this is maybe a critique.
So he must be a good guy.
No, but I'm not saying, I guess what I'm saying is people always will come up afterwards and say, like, they feel conflicted, because the guy is kind of funny, but he represents, like, a genocide, a genocidal state, but whatever. It now escapes me. Oh, but here's that was all to preface to say, among the things that he points out, and this is a softball maybe for you to hit this one out of the park.
Okay.
He says the international community's concern is not credible in this way. He said, like, they passed the heavy support package, and yet nothing has been provided. And and the light support package, quote unquote. You can, only 65% is on the ground. So he's like, we've passed it, but the reality is like if the things that were previously passed.
Well,
go ahead.
I think he's pointing to an underlying reality about the Darfur issues that at the end of the day, the member states don't really care about this all that much. I think folks at the Ban Ki-moon and Kofi Annan before him and Jan Elias and all these folks at the General Secretariat, work on this issue day in and day out, but in the end, they're not given that much support from their powerful member states. For example, I think the U.S. has a lot going on at the UN, and frankly, I think that the U.S. judges that Darfur is not quite the most important bilateral issue they have with China.
Right.
So that they're not going to lean on China to do something about Darfur when they need China to helping them on a host of other different issues at the Security Council, like Iranian proliferation and North Korea and all that.
Sure.
And the Darfur is still not this kind of tier 1 issue, and the fact and sort of the slow pace with which these support packages are being raised, and frankly, I think the slow pace at which troops will be raised for the full hybrid force is almost inevitable because it's just not that big of a priority for people.
I mean,
and there's a lot more talk than action there is on Darfur.
No, on that one, absolutely. I would. And the real kind of cautionary fact out there is that there's this AU force that the Security Council authorized for Somalia, and other than Uganda, that's the only country that's there. Its mandate of 6 months is about to run out, and it's it was never really done.
Yes. Although I did see a late-breaking news today, I think from Reuters, that a group of African nations have pledged to support the hybrid.
Right. Oh, yeah, I did see that.
Troops.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, whatever that means, but at least 5 African nations, including Rwanda, which is, for regional concerns, pretty professional army, is sending their, is at least willing to send their troops into Darfur.
Sure.
So what next? You choose.
Okay. Well, I have something in my mind, but I'll put it further back. Just this morning, in terms of big picture, real world diplomacy. Here, I mean, again, some people might even say this is the unreal world of the UN, because there's been a backroom diplomacy for more than a week to do what's a presidential statement, which really doesn't have. It's not a resolution. It doesn't force anything, but it is an expression of the thoughts and concerns of the Security Council about Lebanon. And it's been going. This thing has been pending, and it was supposed to be passed yesterday. And then there was it was said that Ambassador Khalilzad out of the United States came out and said that one member has a problem, and so we'll come back tomorrow morning. That member was Qatar.
Yes.
And the problem they had is that the presidential statement was expressing concern about Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, and a statement that he made that Hezbollah can reach any place in Israel at any time, which people interpreted to mean that Hezbollah has been, in violation of Resolution 1701, importing weapons into South Lebanon.
Yes.
And which the Hezbollah people, including the person I've referred to before as Hezbollah TV, who's my line on these, not my line, but he says, yes, Nasrallah said that, but that he never said that he's imported anything. What this meant is that he always had that capability. But so Qatar made a big point of saying he shouldn't be named by name. And somebody explained this to me today, and it sort of makes sense to me, is that even though it's just a presidential statement, that if from their point of view, and by they, Qatar was the one carrying this point, if they allow this type of criticism by name, even in just what's really just a presidential statement, that could be the first step down the road toward more sanctions. It would sort of be like that thing already passed. So they would strip out
Nasrallah.
Correct. So they stripped it out, and there's even some more back. There was supposed to be a presidential statement about the humanitarian.
No, I think you should preface this by saying, in order for a prepresidential statement to pass, correct me if I'm wrong,
it has to be unanimous.
All 15 members of the Security Council have to agree.
That's why.
So
you're very good.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I forgot. Yeah, that's why. Otherwise, otherwise they would have just done it 14-1. But that's the thing. You need everyone.
Yeah, it's not like a resolution or anything. It's supposed to be an expression of unity of the council.
And that's
apparently, in the real world, there's no unity about this.
Right. Exactly, and then various people acquiesce. No, you're right. It is kind of strange when you think about it, because it's like it has to be unanimous, but it has no effect.
Yeah.
Whereas things that have effect can pass, whatever, 9-6.
Yeah, but it's almost a heartening way that Qatar is the only country objecting to this. That you have the permanent members of the Security Council are all on board,
right?
With that condemnatory language against Hezbollah, but you have one regional actor that is stopping it, but not even not a regional not a country of not a great power.
Right.
You don't have Russia or China or any European country backing Hezbollah.
But I mean, actually, a lot of people have been saying, but it's hard to see. Russia has been. But I think these guys are also, they understand that the thing doesn't really have this much real world, real world effect.
Yeah.
But maybe this will go on. I mean, the sort of next big thing coming down the pike here will be a resolution which will expand the UN's role in Iraq.
Yes.
And
well,
the news yesterday was
consequences. Yeah.
Yeah. The news yesterday was that people were very surprised that the Russian ambassador Vitaly Churkin said he really doesn't have a problem
he's okay
with the
resolution. This is a resolution that was almost presaged by Khalilzad's New York Times op-ed a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Arguing for a more robust political role, I should say, for the UN in Iraq, and now. Then the U.S. mission and the British mission put forth a resolution, outlining the kind of the expanded political role that the UN should have in Iraq. And surprise, surprise, the Russians agree to it, and so it looks like it's on track to pass.
Yeah, no, everyone was like, yeah, exactly. Who's against it? But it's sort of.
Yeah.
I'll actually tell you who's against it. Ready? The UN Staff Union, the people that actually work here. They said they're preparing their own resolution. It's not like they don't have the force of the Security Council, but they're preparing their own resolution for adoption Tuesday, which will say, that as a matter of like UN employees, until it's safe or they can guarantee their safety.
I mean,
go ahead.
You can't really blame them either.
Right.
It's everyone who goes to Iraq is putting their life in their hands. Right now, the United Nations assistance mission in Iraq is only about 300 staff members in it, and has they have a pretty limited role. Their biggest sort of accomplishment was organizing that purple finger election back in was it 2005, and since then the security situation has deteriorated to a point where they're left just writing reports about human rights abuses, and their political role is limited. Interestingly, it was the Iraq Study Group, I think, that first kind of envisaged this expanded role for the UN in Iraq. This role as something of a neutral political arbitrator between Iraq's various factions and Iraq's neighbors. And of course, the administration kind of threw away just about every recommendation of the Iraq Study Group, but now it seems to be coming back around to this idea that the UN does have this, positive, potentially ameliorative role to play in Iraq.
Well, I think it's been because they can't really think of any other, either way out or sort of fig leaf. I mean, I think a lot of, at least maybe I know too many skeptics, but there are people that say like this is like, as a last gasp, the Bush administration trying to get the UN to take something that's clearly gone out of control, and it's kind of so. Is it a favor by this is obviously oversimplifying it, but the speed with which, like when Khalilzad wrote it, I remember he said, and Ban Ki-moon agrees with me that the UN should be more involved. So the question, there's two different, and this is again probably way too cartoon-like, but the question is, does Ban Ki-moon favor this because he's a pro-American guy and that's why he was put here? Or does he favor it because it would increase the UN's stature and credibility if on this incredibly, important global thing it had a bigger role, right?
Or, does he favor it because it's the right thing to do, because the UN has...
Oh, there is that, of course.
Well, has the capability of it, to the extent that a political solution is possible,
right.
And bringing together the various Iraqi factions and regional actors.
Sure.
The UN has a role to play. Now, the situation may be beyond repair.
Right.
The UN may not be able to accomplish this, even if despite their best efforts. So success here is not by any stretch of the imagination a foregone conclusion.
I mean, quite the contrary. But this is not a rhetorical question. So I mean, some people have said a lot of it will ride on kind of the prestige and credibility of who the UN would send. And so I'm kind of at a loss of, like, do you even know, obviously Tony Blair's already, not that he has that.
Well, I mean, back in 2004,
right.
Lakhdar Brahimi was there.
Right.
And he was able to, stake out a compromise between Sistani, who at the time, was a big player, to get him to agree to the political process. He was Brahimi was the intermediary between the Americans and Sistani, because Sistani wouldn't talk to the Americans.
Yep.
And there was that brief moment where a political solution was possible. That was the result of Brahimi's work behind the scenes. And of course, we haven't mentioned this yet, but the reason that so many UN staff members are so reluctant about this expanded role was the bombing of the UN headquarters back in the summer of 2003 that killed Sergio Vieira de Mello.
Yep.
And so their concern, I think, is not without reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's totally what they're tying it to. But no, absolutely. And I feel, given how serious, I mean, I almost didn't. I didn't say that, but you're absolutely. That's the total base of their concern.
Yeah.
That was, and also that was. I mean, he was one of the UN's, like, very much of a bright star that they could send to solve problems. I think the one.
And he was he was friends and colleagues with a lot of people back at UN headquarters.
Sure.
And they knew him personally, and his death really did send shockwaves.
Right.
Through the system.
I think that, I guess, and I don't mean to get back into the kind of the nitty gritty world of who the UN would send and who.
Yeah.
I think that I will say this, and I don't without. There seems to be it's not like, some people were saying. Within one thing that's happened since we last spoke is that Ban Ki-moon's the person that he promoted to be his representative to the Middle East Quartet and kind of advisors on all things Middle East is a guy called Michael Williams. He'd been and this was a bit it was a pretty high profile announcement. Like, this is going to be Ban Ki-moon's envoy to the Middle East, and what's emerged is that the guy is leaving. He's leaving. In fact, today it was confirmed by the foreign in the UK that he's going to be Gordon Brown's representative to the Middle East.
Yeah.
So there's a sense of, like, and even this guy, I don't know how high within the UN system he was high profile, whether outside he was, but there's a sense among some here that, like, Ban Ki-moon would really to have the UN be kind of a credible mediator and a player in Iraq. He really is going to have to recruit somebody. It's not like a big name, but in a sense it is. And if he can't keep Michael Williams, who's he going to get to do this job in Iraq? Then again, it's not all him.
I think the difference between sort of the two jobs here is that the sort of U.S. and Great Britain, the Security Council, seem poised to empower the UN's sort of guy in Iraq or woman in Iraq. However, the UN's quartet representative is sort of by design, by the Security Council's design, someone who does not have a lot of power.
Yep.
Alvaro de Soto, who you mentioned previously, in that long, scathing letter or sort of review of his time on the job, he compared himself to that sort of knight from the Monty Python.
Getting his arms cut off and his
arms and legs cut off, and he just has, he's powerless because the U.S. and the European Union and principally the U.S. I think is unwilling to grant the UN's representative to the quartet that much power, and so there's then all the power he has is power that's only given to him by member states. However, in Iraq, the U.S. at least and Great Britain seem poised to want to empower the UN's actor. So
right. No, you're right. Then that would help in recruiting somebody. Right.
Yes.
No, sure. Yeah. No, exactly. And it's not to be. It's just they're. I think there are increasing rumblings here of sort of like whether they what they need to do to sort of. Bring in new players, or there's still a problem with them even finding like special representatives to countries like Ivory Coast or Sudan. It could be another problem, but there's still we were 7 months into the Ban administration, and there's still a lot of unfilled spots, and people sort of scratch their head at some of the ones how they're being filled, but that's a whole other topic.
Okay, so new topic.
Okay.
What do you got?
I'm going to go. I'm compelled to say this. I don't mean to
say. Speak away.
Absolutely. This may be a little bit too inside the UN, but I think to.
Well, that's why we have you on here.
I know. I'm probably, but this may be even too inside the UN. There's something called. I won't even preface it. I'll say there's something called.
So I think. Wait. I should say because it's inside the UN, you should speak only in acronym.
Oh, okay. No. I'll try to. I will, and then you can. UNCG. No. There's something called the United Nations Communications Group, and what it involves is the head of communications of the Secretary General. In this case, it's this guy Mike Meyer. Not Myers, Meyer from formerly of Newsweek, and then the lead spokespeople of all the UN funds, programs, and specialized agencies, and they get together once a year, and it seems like a good idea to sort of think about the UN's communication strategy, right? Okay. So be it. I was given a heads up right after the meeting took place that some that
when was the meeting?
The meeting took place in Madrid in June 21st and 22nd.
Right. Okay.
And they. I can't. I'll just tell it this way. I heard some. That there were some. They discussed new media and the way in which the UN should deal with new media. So that sounds. And I was told that in fact the way they discussed it is they were saying they don't really like being covered by quote bloggers or media that they find doesn't have.
Did you take that as a personal slight, Matthew?
I'm told actually that Inner City Press came up by name. That's why it's a little. Okay. I'm doing it in this format. It probably would be. I'm probably too close to it to report on it for any. But for Blogging Heads TV, I think not that it's a low standard, but I feel that people that are the viewers and readers and readership and listeners of Blogging Heads TV. It's interesting that and so I'll go further into it. So then I asked at one of the noon briefings here, could we have a readout on the meeting? And they said yes. They on this topic they talked about how the UN can better engage with new media to get its message out. But in fact, I later got the minutes of the meeting, and there's the minutes. Even they are pretty sanitized, but the minutes say we need to rethink granting accreditation to media that doesn't have a traditional editor function whereby the UN can have recourse to have corrections, which I don't. It's a funny way to think because in fact, I'll just say this self-servingly, but the few times that that a UN agency has said that's incorrect, always run a correction. But I think what the and I've been actually having written on this topic and been getting feedback from. It's strange. It's sort of like the UN is at. I guess it's all government agencies and stuff are trying to figure out how do you deal with a non-traditional media structure. But the UN, I think they're so basically. I can say this: 2 UN funds and programs at this meeting in Madrid stated openly, we're not going to answer. We don't answer questions from bloggers. They don't care, and they don't care the size, the readership. They sort of are. Yeah. And the question is, for an international organization that's trying to reach the public, do they get to choose what journalism is, or do they have to kind of deal with journalism as it's developed in order to get the message out to people? Go ahead.
Let me throw the question back to you.
Please.
Sort of what criteria? First, do you think the UN and its agencies should have sort of criteria for accrediting journalists and bloggers? And if so, what should that criteria be?
If anything, I think if you have to, number one, they should answer questions that come across the idea of that one thing. Well, I'll get back to that in terms of how they answer questions. The only, I guess, reason for their accreditation, and they use this as the rationale, is space limitations. Like that
UN press room is not that big.
It's fun. It's getting bigger all the time. There's been the trend here is like, UPI, for what it's worth, they're closing, but a number of places there's less media coverage here. In fact, that's been something that people have been discussing. But I mean, every government agency can choose who to let in the door. Or, in New York City, who can cross the police lines to cover a fire. But it seems to me, unless you get into like judging media based on the content, which I don't think is the way they want to go. All you have to show is a readership. It seems to me you're reaching people.
So, but how big of a readership? I mean, I don't know. So is your criteria then sort of? Do you think that the UN to accredit bloggers, the bloggers should have to prove that they have a certain threshold of readers?
I guess I'm saying if the idea is that there's limited space, that would be a better criteria than them. What happens here is that and I've heard this from a number of my colleagues in the press corps, when they come up for reaccreditation, there are people in the UN that feel that it's entirely legitimate to read their coverage and say, I don't like this.
Okay.
Somebody said, well, you've shown me the articles you've written, but let me see the full publication because I want to see what the editorial stance is. And that's like, I mean, I think we would both agree that probably like
Sure.
City Hall in New York and I mean, maybe the Bush administration would want to do that. But that clearly like runs afoul of like the First Amendment.
Yeah, no, I agree. At the same time, I haven't heard sort of a good answer from you, though.
Good. I'm only saying in terms of readership.
What criteria should an organization like the UN use to credit new media?
I guess I'm just saying is, for example, if you can only, let's say during the General Assembly, Hugo Chavez comes, and let's say the briefing room only has 64 chairs, it doesn't seem insane to me to say, if you're writing for a newsletter for 3 people, maybe we don't give you the chair. You know what I mean? If you're trying to allocate limited space, then I think you might want to modify it by saying like, there are publications with a relatively smaller readership but a more interest. You'd want to somehow balance it geographically, right? I'll be honest with you, nothing in the discussion that this UN communication group had was about lack of space in the media room here. In fact, if anything, the UN is having a hard time getting people to cover it. I attend briefings here where in the 20 minutes before they do a briefing, there's a lot of things on climate change. The UN's expert on climate change, Ivo de Boer, came and spoke, and they couldn't find people to go to the briefing room. I mean, I go. It's not out of a favor. I'm just saying it's not. The UN headquarters is not. There's not a lack of space for reporters to cover it. So I don't think that's the rationale. I think it's a good question, and I'm uncomfortable saying it.
Should they, VDAR.com, that the borderline. Well, it's a white supremacist, website has a huge readership.
Sure.
Should they be granted,
Well, no, that's it. I mean, then I think exactly. I mean,
accreditation or
Megadeth.
The listservs for heavy metal groups, or it just seems like it's a really hard. Hard, and I think like every organization is struggling with this right now. Now, I, as a loud and proud member of the new media, am all for the new media covering everything everywhere all the time.
Sure.
So I'm sympathetic to you here, but it is I think an organization like the UN does have legitimate concerns. When it tries to decide how or if to credit bloggers. Right.
I guess, but here's the thing. I guess I'm saying this much more experientially. For example, I cover the UN development program, UNDP.
Yeah.
And obviously, some of the coverage is sort of investigative, and they don't really like it. But the reality is like I've come to realize, like, they really don't get a lot of inquiries. I mean, it's not like it seems like there are many of these funds, and I know the press people of WFP, UNICEF. Most of these people want, and it varies by agency. I'm not sure historically why some are more open to the media than others, but they want to have inquiries. You know what I mean? I mean, in the sense, whereas UNDP has basically adopted a policy of like, I know a freelance journalist who will remain unnamed, but a pretty well-known freelance journalist, sometimes writing for places as renowned as the Wall Street Journal and sometimes others. And UNDP adopts the approach of saying, okay, you've asked us some questions, but what publication are you writing this for? And then they'll call the editor of that publication to make sure. So I guess what I'm saying is that they're allocating their answer is going to be based on the perceived, I guess, influence of what you're writing for. Mm-hmm. But there's not a lack of time. I've gone over there, and they have a whole floor of press people. But I think that they basically will decide if they think that the coverage is in any way critical, they won't even answer factual questions. Anyway, I know I'm sort of veering off a little bit there, but I think there's I guess I'll cut to the chase. This discussion of trying to move backwards in terms of being less accessible to the media didn't take place under Kofi Annan. Even in the days in which like oil for food was taking place and there was a lot of negative coverage, to my knowledge, they didn't try to throw journalists out that attacked them. They did. There's a sort of famous incident where Kofi Annan said to this James Bone, who writes for the Times of London, "You're an overgrown schoolboy and you're too cheeky." But nobody tried to throw anyone out. And I think there's a sense, hopefully it won't go down that road, but there seems to be a sense that in the ban, it's not just that I read an editorial or op-ed today from the Canberra newspaper in Australia saying that ban is inept with the press. But inept is one thing, but sort of paranoid and trying to sort of preclude press coverage is something else. So I think one of the reasons when I saw it, I don't really know how real the threat is.
The sort of union of new media, UN coverage bloggers, feel for your perceived persecution, Matthew.
Well, I know. I mean, and no, you've found that I don't know why. It's sort of. I mean, I'm always interested in the idea of like the UN does a lot of good things, but it's sort of like it should live up to its principles. So I don't mean to. This is the least of it, but there, we can talk about peacekeepers in the Congo. We can talk about any number of things. There was a protest here about a month ago. There was an event on the lawn of the UN, sponsored by Dow Chemicals, as luck would have it, for a run, an environmental run around the world called Blue Planet Run. But the whole thing, they were like Dow Chemical banners, and it was the UN with Dow.
Okay.
And these two, it was only two. It was two young women protesters suddenly unveiled a banner, saying like Dow, you're destroying the environment.
Yeah.
And the UN, and so they were hustled off by security. So I follow them, and the guard says to me, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm covering this. He's like, go back and cover the event. And it just struck me like the UN goes all around the world.
It wasn't New York police?
No, it wasn't. This was UN security.
UN police, yeah.
And I went out of my way. It's not like their fault. Like there had to be some training to say, if you choose to partner on UN grounds with Dow Chemical, it's entirely foreseeable that there will be a protester. I don't know how they got in. God bless them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so the UN will, not preach, will preach correctly to countries around the world to allow a free press and not, fire on crowds and stuff. Mm-hmm. So it seems like, especially on something, it may be minor, but this, whatever. Yeah. I love this stuff. I'm here, so I cover it.
No,
but I think it's, it's living up to, and I think, and the thing is that the real thing, this is not against anyone, but one of the things of either new media or kind of like narrow casting is that you can cover things that the New York Times and the wire services they're going to cover the Darfur resolution. Are they going to cover not just the two Dow Chemical protesters, but just a variety, even the staff union saying we don't want to go to Iraq is viewed as a kind of an in-house dirty laundry story. But it's actually not that small a story,
No. Listen, I agree, and I want you to keep on blogging.
No. My hope is actually that more people would.
You say the trend is one way. I think at some point the UN is going to be forced to come to terms with a set of criteria to accredit new media and bloggers. Of course, it's a question facing institutions from sort of the Democrat and Republican parties to to the White House to basically all over the world is sort of how to come up with a set of standards to accredit bloggers, because we are a diverse bunch and of diverse quality. Yep. Your quality, though, is never in question, Matthew.
Okay. Actually, my quality of this broadcast, whatever. It's still recording, but it may be that my image has frozen. So.
Okay. Well, we should end it here then.
Okay. Oh, really? No, it's fine. No, actually, I literally just noticed this. I don't know how long I've been frozen for, but it's okay. I look sort of demented.
I actually do have to get going.
No, sure.
Well, good chatting, Matthew.
No, definitely. And thanks for indulging me at the end. But there are the Darfur thing. I think that's something that needs to be because exactly there's a sense of like it passed. I saw some stories saying like everything is solved, and as I think we can one thing we can both agree on is that very little has been solved.
Right. But, you got me there.
Okay.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.